What's up everybody? Nate here. So I, like millions of other Americans, purchased a house back in 2020. And let me tell you, the process was crazy. This was my very first home that I'd ever purchased, and going through the entire process during a pandemic was definitely one for the books. Now, I've owned my home and have been living in the same house for a little over 2 years now. And along the way, I have learned a lot from my college renting days. And that has made me do a lot of thinking about whether I should have continued to rent or if buying a house really was for me. So today I want to talk all about my experience purchasing a house in 2020, and hopefully that will help you purchase a house today. I'm going to go over some of the things that I learned, some things you need to avoid, and all of the pros and cons to home ownership in 2022. But before I get into all of that, do me a quick favor and hit smash or destroy that thumbs up button below and ring that notification bell too. Both of those two things are completely free and they help to show me that you like this video and that you want to see even more just like it. Thank you so much for doing that, and now I want to wind the clock all the way back to January 2020. So I graduated from college at the end of 2019. I had finally got my degree and I was finally ready to go out into the world. I was pretty lucky in the fact that I got a really good job at the start of 2020. This was just before the pandemic, and I actually remember watching TV with my family and friends thinking about how crazy everything was going on in China and how even crazier it would be if it came to the United States. So now that I had finally got a better job and I finished my degree, it was time to move on to the next thing. And my wife and I talked about it a lot, and we decided it was time to buy a home. We had been doing a variety of renting and living with parents up to that point, and now that we had really stable, well-paying jobs, we needed to get into a house. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about here is the difference between when I bought a house and what happened at the end of 2020 and into 2021. When I purchased a house, it was just before the pandemic, so things hadn't gotten really that crazy as of yet. During my entire home buying process, though, I learned a lot of things. One thing I learned is that it takes a long time. Don't expect to walk into your dream home the first house that you tour. It's going to take a while. Like, I remember my wife and I walked into this house and there was literally just a toilet in the basement with no door. It took us literally months to go through each house. We were walking through homes in order to try to figure out if they were going to meet our goals today and if they were going to meet our goals in the future. That's something that you have to keep in mind when you're looking at houses. How long do you plan to stay in that house for? That question alone is going to have a major influence over your budget and your goals for the future. If you only plan on staying in a house for a short period of time, then you probably aren't going to necessarily need a whole lot of things. In addition, if you don't plan on starting a family in that particular home, then it might not have to be that big of a house. However, that doesn't mean that if you don't plan on starting a family, then you don't have to buy a big house. If it's within your budget, then you can do it. The other thing that I learned during that entire process is to not put too much pressure on your future plans. Nobody knows how long you're going to stay in a house for, so just because you say during the process, yeah, I'm going to renovate this house and make it my dream home, doesn't mean that that will actually happen. Be realistic with yourself. Are you actually the type of person that's going to renovate a house? Or is it better to get a house that's already turnkey ready for you? You have to know all of that, because that wallpaper from the mid-60s is not coming down on its own. So my wife and I went through a lot of houses. We did a ton of house tours and nothing really was sticking out. But then the pandemic struck. That immediately made buying a house pretty impossible, because now we couldn't work directly with the real estate agent anymore. We couldn't go into homes and actually tour them. So we relied on a lot of internet searches and we relied on a lot of 3D virtual house tours. Some of these websites have this thing now where you can actually do a 3D walk through the house, and it's pretty cool. What's pretty cool now was a necessity in 2020, because we had to figure out if this house was for us. We couldn't actually physically see it. We looked at many of these different properties trying to figure out which house was for us. Then we finally found one. Now, this is when things got pretty crazy, because this was around March of 2020. March of 2020 was, of course, the stock market crash and also when the pandemic really started to take off. So we couldn't walk into the house. We couldn't actually meet the sellers, and all of the paperwork had to be done at a different location. Now, this is definitely something that I regret about the home buying process. I wish I could have met the sellers and actually talked to them a little bit about the house. Got a little bit more details than what you're gonna get on a document that the real estate agent prints off or on pictures that you see online. Literally, small questions like, when was the last time the air filter was changed on the furnace? When was the last time the batteries were changed on all of the smoke detectors? Stuff like that you never think about when you're walking through a house, and when you own a home, there's so much more going on that it doesn't really cross your mind to think about it, but some of those details are very much important. So looking at the house that we really wanted, my wife and I decided that we were going to put an offer in. The crazy part is, this was all completely sight unseen. We did everything that we could online and had questions with our real estate agent, but for the most part, we put an offer on the house without actually walking in it. Now, thinking back on that today, that was crazy because there were so many variables that could have not worked out for us. But for the most part, I think we got pretty lucky. Now, we put a full price offer in immediately as soon as the house was listed. We liked it that much. The day it went on the market, we put in an offer, and literally 2 days later, it was accepted. So now it's late March 2020, we have a pending sale on a house, and we're trying to figure out what comes next. Well, finding the home is the easiest part of the process. It might seem like the most difficult while you're going through it, but once you actually have a deal in the works, the next part is going through all of the paperwork. The mounds of paperwork is going to be the most confusing and complicated part of your home buying journey. In Michigan, where I live, you have to get an appraisal of the house, and you also have to get a home inspection before you can finish purchasing it. The reason for all of this is because you are about to own something worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in most cases. Most Americans do not have hundreds of thousands of dollars lying around, so they need a mortgage. A mortgage is literally just a loan that you get for a house. And the bank that's loaning you all of that money wants to make sure that you can for sure pay off that mortgage in the future. This is a big change that we've seen over the last decade with the housing market. Back in the 2008 crash, you didn't have to prove your income. You didn't even have to prove that you had any money at all. Banks were willing to give you money to buy a home because that was seen as the American dream. However, that eventually led to the 2007 and 2008 housing crash. Now it is completely different. I literally had to prove to the bank how I earned every single dime that I had in the bank and on my paychecks. They wanted to know everything, and the process can sometimes seem a little intrusive, but it's for your own good. If the bank finds out that you can't actually afford this home, then they're not going to give you a mortgage. So you have to prove to them your income and how much you have in savings to show them that you are financially responsible. That is one of the biggest differences between renting and owning a home. When you rent a home, you don't have to have tens of thousands of dollars in the bank. All you need to have is your rent payment every single month. Of course, in a lot of cases, you still have to do a credit check and you still have to go through an income check, but for the most part, you just need to make sure that you're making your payments, and that's it. Buying a house is not like that though. There are so many other costs associated. Not only did we have to put up the initial money, we also had something called closing costs. The closing costs is how your real estate agents eventually make money from the sale. Not only that, but there's money that goes into a possible escrow account, an account that you put money into every single month that basically pays all of your taxes and your mortgage on your behalf. Some people prefer to have that. That way you never miss a tax payment or a mortgage payment. It's all done for you. All you need to do is put your money into the account. And a lot of the times it's done automatically. But like I said, with renting, there just isn't all of those costs. This makes a home expensive. Now, what I want to say as far as things that I learned through the buying process is you need to read the fine print of every one of your mortgage documents very carefully. And definitely, if you can afford it, have a lawyer present to go through it with you. There is going to be so many different things that you're not going to understand on your mortgage, and that's okay. What's not okay is never understanding them. Buying a house is a complicated process, so you definitely want to have a lawyer present. I made the mistake of not having a lawyer present, and this ended up leading us to some pretty big issues down the road. For instance, I didn't know that when you buy a house, all of the utilities have to be transferred over into the new owners. In addition, all of that from the past owners is supposed to be paid for before you move in. I actually moved into my house and found a lien on my house because the previous homeowners hadn't paid their water bill. Now, I not only had to pay the overdue amount, I had to pay that water bill that's been growing for for the past few months. It wasn't cheap. We paid it, but it was a big problem. That's what I mean when it comes to a lawyer. Have your real estate agent present and have a lawyer present, so that way you make sure that all of your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted. Basically, everything is done to the books and everything is taken care of how it's supposed to be. Now, it's important to keep in mind that nobody is perfect. There are probably going to be mistakes made with your mortgage, and that's okay. But we need to have a system in place to catch those issues before we run into problems. And our situation was really unique because we didn't actually even go into the office to sign all of our loan papers. We literally had to sit in the car because of the pandemic. So we weren't able to have a lawyer present. We weren't able to have our real estate agent present, and the sellers weren't even there. We didn't even actually physically meet the sellers until after all of the paperwork was signed. What's even crazier is for the key exchange, that was the first time that we had ever walked into the house. I personally would not recommend that for you in the future. If you have the opportunity, do a house tour. In fact, do multiple. If you can have the sellers be there, have the sellers be there so you can ask them questions. You don't have to be too intrusive, but just out of curiosity, try to figure out as much as you can about the home. This is something that you're going to be paying for a long time. So you don't want to find out that something is wrong with it, or you don't want to find out later that there's a different associated cost. You want to have all of that figured out right from the get-go. That way you're saving money and you're saving yourself time. Like I said, we got pretty lucky, so we went through the entire moving process. Now, I will say, if you can afford movers, 100% do movers. It makes the entire process so much easier, and you don't have to allot as much time to get your things and then unpack them. And also, make sure all of your boxes are labeled and they have arrows on them. Which side is the top? Because there were so many boxes that I ended up opening that I didn't know if it was the top or the bottom. That was pretty scary, but we ended up moving in, and like I said, we've lived in this house for the past 2 years. Now, with all that being said, what I want to do next is go into all of the pros and cons of home ownership. There is a lot that I've learned after I've purchased the home that hopefully can help you in the future. So here are all of the pros when owning a house. Number one, you have all of the space to yourself. This is something that you don't always get with renting an apartment or a home. That is your space. In most cases, houses are going to be bigger than apartments, and you can do whatever you want with those spaces. So if you want to change the wallpaper, or you want to paint a room, or you want to knock down a wall, you can do that. You can't do that if you're renting. You have to get total permission from your landlord, and more often than not, they're not going to let you do it. And it's not because the landlord is mean and doesn't want you to make changes to the home that you live in. It's because if you leave, well, now they have a house that's built to your specifications and not general for the next renter. But like I said, you have space to yourself. No shared walls. You can walk around and do whatever you want in your own home. That means making all of the decisions yourself. Number two, owning my home has been stable and secure. I know that because I have a 30-year fixed mortgage, my mortgage payment is never going to change. It's always going to be the same, so I know how much money I need to put aside every single month. That security is awesome because when you rent, inflation goes up every single year, so you're never gonna know what next year is going to bring. And of course, I always have a house to come back to. It's very comfortable. I can make the space however I want, and I don't have to worry about neighbors changing things up or my lease agreement eventually changing too. Everything is a lot more stable. And then of course, number three, as we were going through the home buying process, there are so many more options, at least in my area. I have the option of choosing which type of house I want. There's different types of houses out there, from ranches to two-story buildings and everything in between, from sizes to places that have basements to places that have garages. There are so many different options, fixer-uppers, turnkey ready homes. All of that is at your fingertips when you're buying a house, and I love that. In my area, at least, when you rent, there's not really a lot of options. There's some different types of rental homes, but if you want to live in an apartment, they are basically all exactly the same. I mean, you might get like an extra bedroom or an apartment that's a little bit bigger, but for the most part, they're going to look and they're going to feel the same. So that is all of the pros that I see in owning a home. And of course, when you're done with your mortgage, you'll actually own something. You will have something that you can call yours, and nobody can take that away. Every single month, you are putting payments towards something that is eventually going to become yours. That builds equity that you can eventually borrow against if you want to. And like I said, you can sell your home down the road and potentially make a profit. You can't do that with a rental home or an apartment. You are putting money into a landlord's pocket, meaning all of your rent payments, while they might be less, are disappearing every single month. You're not really gaining any equity in the home. And you can't sell that home. So after you're done renting, you are left with nothing. But with that being said, here are now all of the cons to owning a home. Number one, it's expensive. Take the number you have in your mind that you think you're going to put down on a home and how much you think you're going to put into maintenance and other costs. I can almost guarantee that you're going to double it. Whether you have a renovation in mind or you have some small projects you want to do, they take a lot of time, and that costs you money in the long term. You have your initial down payment that you put on a house. This can be anywhere between 3 and 20% depending on which type of mortgage you're getting. That is just one cost, and then you have an appraisal fee that you have to pay, and then of course you have an inspection fee that you have to pay. And we're not done there. Next you have to put in closing costs, which are going to cost you typically thousands more dollars. That all just depends on the price of your home. Closing costs are usually between 2 and 5% of whatever the entire cost of your house is. So if your house is $100,000, you might end up paying around $5,000 in closing costs. That is of course on top of your down payment. So if you want to put down, say 10% on your home, well, then you have to put down $10,000. Then closing costs are $5,000 on top of that. So now you're paying $15,000 up front for that home. Next, you have monthly mortgage payments. If you have a 15 or 30-year fixed mortgage, well, then they're not going to change over the lifetime of your loan, but you have to pay that every single month. That could be more similar to what your rent was going to be, but the costs before that are pretty high. Going along with that, number two, we have taxes. I mentioned before that if you have a fixed rate interest loan, then that means your monthly payment is not going to change over the lifetime of your loan, but the amount that you pay to live in your house is definitely going to change year over year. I didn't realize this when I bought my first home. I thought that the amount that I was going to pay up front for my mortgage was going to be the same every single month. What I didn't take into account though is property taxes change every single year. And typically they go up. So year after year, I've now got a tax bill, which has meant that I've had to put more aside every single month in order to just live in my house. That means my house costs me more every single year, and taxes are expensive. Number three, you can't just leave a home. If I decide that I want to just up and leave my house, well, that's going to be a problem. I have to go through an entire seller's process, which can sometimes take months. Versus renting a home or renting an apartment, once your lease is up, you can just pack up and leave. You have that flexibility. Versus me, I'm literally tied down to this house. Now, I think that offers a lot of stability and security, and the benefits outweigh the cons, but honestly, if I wanted to leave, I couldn't do it. At least not right away. I have to list my house, and then I have to find somebody who actually wants to buy it. That all can take time, and it can also cost a lot of money. I also pay closing costs when I sell a home, so if I don't have those closing costs up right away, then guess what? I'm not going to be able to sell. And then I also have to find a new place to live, and in this housing market, that is nearly impossible. Myself and many millennials are also stuck in their homes right now, so that can definitely be perceived as a con. And then finally, you have to do everything yourself. If you want to paint something, or you want to change the carpet, or all of the lawn maintenance, that all has to be done by you, or you have to figure out a plan for it to get done. You don't have a landlord to rely on here, so everything that you do comes from you. I'll be the first to admit that I'm not super handy and I don't have a green thumb, so when it comes to things to do around the house that require a lot of maintenance, I'm not the best person to call. But like I said, I really don't have any other choice other than to learn how to do all of these things, because now I own the home, and if I want to continue to live in a nice home, then I have to do all of those sorts of things. And the bigger point here is this: as you go through the home buying process and home ownership, you're always going to be learning. Don't get too discouraged if there's not something you know how to do. The only way you're going to learn how to do it is if you go out and do it. Try to educate yourself as much as possible throughout the process. Get with a lawyer if you have to, and definitely try to communicate with sellers and real estate agents as much as you possibly can. Getting a home that you love in 2022 is definitely not impossible. It's getting harder because of interest rates and the housing market exploding still right now, but this is just another hurdle that a lot of millennials and Americans have to jump through. The more you learn right now though, the fewer hurdles that you'll actually have to jump through, and the less chance that you'll have of regretting your home buying purchase this year and next. But now I want to hear from you on this issue. What are some things that you learned when you bought your first home, or what are some things that you're learning right now trying to buy a home in 2022? As always, whatever your thoughts are, leave a comment below before you go. But that is it for today's business and financial news breakdown. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date with all of the top business and financial news from around the country, our team puts together a free daily newsletter, and you can subscribe to it by clicking the link in this corner right here. And if you want to stay up to date with me and everything else happening in the business and financial world, I'm putting out updates 7 days a week over here on this channel, and I've actually got another one ready for you right here, so be sure to check that out before you go. That is it for me, everybody. Be kind out there, and I'll see you all in the next one.